Thank you everybody for coming tonight. I am Mary Potter Kenyon. I'm a program coordinator at Shalom Spirituality Center. I'm a therapeutic art coach and a certified grief counselor, and I am the author of 7 books, one of which I'll talk a little bit about tonight because that's where this program came from. And so I'm going to start sharing my screen, but tonight we're going to be talking about a legacy of a magic pencil. If you picked up your packet, you should have your own magic pencil in there. Some of those handouts will be for the program in 2 weeks. So you really don't need a lot except maybe a pencil and a piece of paper tonight. And so I'm going to share my screen. So my legacy of creativity comes from my mother. And my mother lived in Earlville. She was the mother of 10 children. We were very poor, and yet she still managed somehow to find time for creativity and to beautify our home with the different things that she made. I'll show you a few of those things. She was just such an amazing woman that when she died in 2010, I believed that she left behind some lessons that all of us can apply in our own lives. So you can see the kinds of things she did. She was, long before there was anything like Pinterest, she started saving little things from magazines of things she wanted to do. She would draw little patterns for the little dolls that she made. So this is kind of like a vintage Pinterest. It's actually brown paper sacks from the grocery store. And she would either sew them together or tape them together or put them in a binder. No one wanted these after she passed away except me, and I'm so glad because I do have 9 siblings and nobody fought me for them. It's just, and I'm fascinated by seeing what other people, which is why you can fall down the hole of Pinterest, is you might be fascinated by what other people are fascinated by. And so I'm fascinated by her mind, the way her mind worked. So she would find something in a magazine like this fabric collages, and then she would actually make some of those things. So she used brown burlap for the owl, buttons, her embroidery. She made this that she had seen in a magazine, her own rendition of it. So you grew up with a mom like that, and you kind of just think that people, that's the way everybody lives, right? Everybody writes letters, and to her mother, she wrote this letter, and I have her letters also. And this is a cabinet that I inherited. And in her letter to her mother, because they never had film, they never had money for camera film, she drew a picture of this cabinet that the neighbor man had given them when they had visited him. And my mom and dad said, "Oh my gosh, that's beautiful." And he says, "Do you want it? You can have it for a loaf of bread, a loaf of homemade bread." So that's in the letter. So I know the history behind it. I know that Shaker style cabinet came from a neighbor and was probably old already. So I can't even imagine how old it is. And she painted on her garage. She painted a chicken on her garage. She was the kind of woman who, at the age of 41, decided she was going to sit down outside with a kitchen knife and a piece of wood and carve a piece of wood. And so over on the left hand, upper left hand, is her first wood carving. I mean, we're talking about a 41-year-old woman who'd never carved wood before, just sitting down with a kitchen knife and thinking, "Oh, I'm just going to carve a piece of wood." Most of us don't think that way. She didn't know enough how to make the wolf's legs attached, so she did those separately and then glued them. But she gradually honed that talent, and she, as you can see, she made a lot of different wood carvings. She started selling them as a home business. I have the list of where a lot of her wood carvings went. There's one wood carving in Bolivia. There was wood carvings all over the United States that people purchased from her. And the Michael the Archangel on the right hand is one that came back to me 45 years after she carved it. The person who had bought it said, "I want it to go back to the family," and they chose me for some reason for that statue. And I was amazed that St. Michael came back to this family 45 years after my mother had carved it. And I could see what they paid, because the sticker was still on the bottom, and it was $100 she had sold that for. And if you've ever been to Bright Box restaurant, the picture on the top is one she had done for Brightbox, and then it burnt down, and she ended up doing a different picture for them, which still is hanging there. And the one below is one she had done for my brother. So, I mean, she was quite talented. And I think seeing that, it kind of just makes you think that maybe there's something in that, whatever is in you could maybe come out too. For me, it was never much about art. I did try to do some paintings, and I've got some old paintings that I had done, and I drew all the time in high school. But for me, it was writing. And that book on the right-hand side, I was 10 years old, and I found it in my mother's things after she passed away, and realized, wow, you know, that's all it takes is somebody to believe in you. Maybe you can actually do what you thought you could do when you were 10 years old, write a book. And she had also put this big chief tablet into my sock drawer when I was like gone at school one day. And so, without saying anything, so she saw something in me, which we often do in our own children, and encouraged that. I hope everybody in this room was encouraged by somebody, because sometimes all it takes is one person to discourage us, a teacher or a well-meaning parent. You know, you're never going to make money off of that, and you shouldn't do whatever it is. Sometimes that's all it takes for us to never, ever reach our potential. So the very first thing I got published and I was paid for was in 1989. And it was in the Crayons magazine, I believe it was. And it was just this quick little thing I wrote out. It probably took me 15 minutes, and I sent it in, and I got a $50 check, and I thought, okay, this is easy. I'll just be a writer. And for 30 some years after that, I struggled to do that, but it was never a lot of money. It was not, and it was not as easy as I thought it was. So this was my life for many, many years after that first piece was published. I literally would write with a child on my back, and that's a typewriter there that I'm typing away at. And my husband snapped this picture. And that was just kind of my life. I found ways to work it around raising kids, because I eventually had 8 children. I would get up real early in the morning and write. I would sit by their beds at night and write by the night of a light of a nightlight, just so that I could hold on to this one thing that I thought I needed to hold on to, that little piece of creativity in me. And these are some of the books that I've had published. I've been in magazines and newspapers and anthologies as well. These happened after my husband's death in 2012. I mean, he was the one who always believed in me, encouraged me, but he didn't get to see any of these. So it's kind of bittersweet to see that happen after he died. So after my mother died, and I spent a lot of time in her empty house. One thing we need for creativity is we actually do need some solitude, and we do need some quiet time to think, you know, what do I want to do? What do I want to create? And that's hard to find for a lot of us. If you've got a job, if you've got children, if you've got little kids. So my husband would encourage me to go to her house and just write. And there was no internet, and there was no phone. And so it was nice and quiet there. And so I did a lot more writing those 3 months until her house sold than I've probably done in 3 years. But it's hard for us to do that. It's hard for us to allow ourselves to have time for creating in whatever way we create, because that can be music or quilts or gardening or baking. It's hard to find the time because it seems like that's for leisure time. And most of us would say we don't have any leisure time. But when I was cleaning out her house the very last day, and in her workroom, I was dusting the windowsills, my fingers hit this something, an object on the windowsill, and I pulled it up, and I saw this old vintage thin advertising pencil, and my 2 youngest daughters were with me, and I just joked with them and said, this is one of Grandma's magic pencils. This is the pencil she would have used to draw before she painted. This is, you know, a magic pencil. And they just rolled their eyes because that's Mom. And I went home and I was just thinking about, you know, her being so creative, and me always wanting to encourage my children to be creative, but some of them thinking, well, I got to go into nursing, not art, because nursing will make me money and art won't. And, you know, what we all want for our children, and I hope for ourselves, is to find and do something we love. So I was sitting there, I was thinking, well, you know what? I used to draw. I used to draw in high school and I kind of enjoyed it. I wonder if I could do it anymore. So I took that magic pencil and I took a piece of typing paper and I sat down and I drew this kind of bad, but not horrible tree. And I hear a gasp in the doorway. And there's my 11 or 12-year-old daughter. And she's just staring and she says, oh my gosh, you don't know how to draw? That really is a magic pencil. Can I use it next? And I kind of laughed, but I thought about that. And these kids, my children, did not know the girl who had been an artist or the girl who had loved drawing. They only knew the woman who had practiced writing for years after years after years. And so I thought this is time for a valuable lesson for my children. So I pulled out my little art folder that had been stuck in a cabinet somewhere. And I showed them the trees I used to draw in 1976. And I said, well, look at the 2011. That's not near as good as what I was doing when I was 17 years old or 16 years old. But I wasn't practicing for 40 years. I wasn't practicing drawing. And that's what can happen. You get rusty with whatever you're not practicing. But it doesn't mean that if I didn't spend some time at it, I might be able to hone that talent again. That whatever we used to love to do, that maybe as adults, we could try again. And it might not look like, you know, what we think it should look like, but we could eventually maybe hone some of those talents if we enjoyed them enough. And I started thinking about that magic pencil because I spoke to women who were homeschooling their kids. They were young mothers, and they were saying the same thing. I don't have time. I don't have time for creativity. I don't have time for this. And I said, well, do you make time and make money, make sure there's money for your kids? Are you taking them to swimming lessons and piano lessons and gymnastics or whatever it is and spending money? Well, yeah, of course, because I see something in them. Well, what about you? You know, and it just, they couldn't meet my eyes because what about them? You know, they just don't have time. And then I spoke to some groups of women in their 70s and 80s, and it was kind of the same thing. I asked them about their kids. Oh yeah, you know, they saw it when they were kids. They tried to encourage whatever it was they had in them. And when I asked about them and if they made time for creativity, I would hear one of two things. It's too late for me now, or I don't have any talents. And so that kind of broke my heart because I thought, really, we all have it in us. All we need is to maybe take the time because we're not, or make the time. So that's when I got this idea, that was 2011, for a book on creativity, because I thought there's something in this. There is something to this idea that young women are telling me that there's no time and they don't have time, and older women are telling me it's too late. Well, we got to do something in between there then if we want to change that. So I just jotted down some notes, and I do everything on paper, and you can see it's a mess. But this first piece of paper over there was actually my original notes, and I stuck them in the file folder, and it was several years before I actually started writing. But I continued to study creativity, and I'm a reader, so I had books. I can look at my Goodreads account and tell you I read approximately 60 books related to creativity, just immersing myself in the science of it and what it was, and were we happier, and how do people do it, and how do they do it in their busy lives. And this is just one of the stacks of the books, the kinds of books I was reading. And as I read, I took notes on creativity. You can see kind of it eventually became the chapters of the book. What about creativity midlife? You know, is there such a thing? Can our brain handle creativity in midlife? Lo and behold, our midlife brain is amazing, I found through research. And our midlife brain can handle a lot and can, there's some benefits to midlife brains. What about mindfulness? You keep hearing those buzzwords of mindfulness. Well, writing a letter can be mindfulness. And gratitude. Gratitude is important and related to creativity. But this is one of the books that really hit home for me, Wired to Create by Scott Barry Kaufman and Carolyn Gregor. And they looked at all the latest findings of neuroscience and psychology And they proved that there is a connection to every single one of us we're designed. We are actually designed to create. I mean, that was fascinating to me. So what I thought about the younger mothers and the older women and my children and the people I knew and saw something in was shown to be supported by research, that we are all designed to create. And then I looked at George Land's NASA creativity test. Well, who needs to be more creative than the NASA engineers? So George Land devised a study and a test so that they could kind of select who's the most creative for their engineers and scientists. And then for some interesting reason, he decided to take that adult test that was being given to engineers and scientists and give it to 1,600 5-year-old children in Head Start. Now, if you know what Head Start is, you know that's a government-funded preschool program, so these children were poor. And he gave this same test that they were using at NASA for creativity. And he found that 98% of those kids were creative geniuses. I mean, 98% scored as creative geniuses on this test. And then he gave the same test to them when they were 10, and it was down to 30% scoring as creative geniuses. At age 15, it was 12%. He gave it to 280,000 adults, and a dismal 2% of us scored as creative geniuses. That tells scientific researchers, and it tells me something. It tells me something happens to us between the time we are 5 years old and the time we are adults. And we need to figure out what it is. What is it that's causing us to not be creative anymore? There in Dyersville at the library, because I was so excited about this topic, when I worked at the library, I decided to start a creativity group. I just knew there was something to this idea, that because one of the things they found is if you want to be more creative, you need to hang out with creative people. And I think it was Jim Rohn, who is a researcher, who said that you become like the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you want to be more creative, spend time with creative people. So I started this group, and we would meet once a month, and we would just try new things. So a couple of these ladies are in here tonight. We would try painting. Some of us had never picked up a paintbrush ever. Others had picked up a paintbrush maybe not since grade school or high school. The idea was to have fun, not to create some great masterpiece, but I think we got some pretty good masterpieces in there. And we did have fun, and it was just, that was one of our most well-attended ones, probably because something about painting appeals to a lot of people, even if they haven't tried it for a while. The only thing missing was wine. We didn't try some wine there. And then we tried ukuleles. And I have to tell you, my fingers didn't want to do what you're supposed to do, but I had to remind myself, because one of the tenets of creativity, being more creative, is allowing yourself to try new things and allowing yourself to fail. I failed dismally with the ukulele playing, but I'd never ever had this wish to be a musician. So I could just have fun and try different things. But that is one of the things when we want to be more creative, we have to allow ourselves to fail, and we have to allow ourselves to try new things, even if it's something we think we won't be very good at. And so this is the book that became the result of all of this research, but also of testing some of the things that we were going to do in our creativity group ended up in the book. And at least 2 of those women are featured in the book too. Also in the book, my mother's handwriting is featured at the beginning of each chapter, and that meant a lot to me. I interviewed people that I thought were everyday creative in our everyday life, not the famous people, not famous artists, but people who were incorporating creativity into their life some way. And it was a yoga teacher, artist. I mean, there was just a lot of different, and a speaker, just different kinds of creative people. Now, this is my brother. He inherited my mother's wood carving tools, He was over 60 and retired when he started carving, and now can't stop, loves it, does it every day, whether he sells anything or not. It's just something, it's a passion in him that he discovered in midlife. What we're going to do tonight is I want you to take out a piece of paper and a pencil, and we're going to look at some of these questions because this is going to get us thinking. And even if you've done this before, I want you to do it again because sometimes you think of something else. So we'll kind of combine the questions, but one of them, I want you to look back, and I don't want you to take a lot of time doing this because sometimes those biggest memories are at the forefront, but just think, and you're going to want to, some of us have to think farther back than others, but just think about, what was it you enjoyed doing as a child? What kind of activities were you drawn to? Was it digging in the dirt, helping your mom in the kitchen? Did you love reading? Did you love drawing? I want you to think back to the deeper recesses of your mind. I'm going to give you a few minutes and just write down those things that you loved doing as a child. And it might be something you kind of forgot about, because I had somebody say once, you know what? I forgot I used to love making Barbie doll clothes, and I haven't sewn for years. Maybe I should try sewing. Then I want you to add, when you look back, were there things you wished you could do or you maybe asked your parents to do, but for whatever reason you weren't able to? Did you want to ride horses? Did you want to play an instrument, but maybe they didn't have the money? Was there's things that you wished you could do, but you weren't able to? And then thinking back to your childhood, do you remember your parents talking about maybe a talent that you had, or a teacher, or another trusted adult? Did somebody tell you or observe in you something that maybe you've kind of forgotten about since, or that you were too young to see in yourself? Was a teacher giving you A's on something that maybe you're great at essays in grade school, but you just haven't even thought about it for a long time? And I hope you had somebody telling you or observing something good in you. For me, it was my dad saying, use your use your talent for talking for good, not evil. And I didn't think I had a talent for talking. I just liked to talk. And then when you were old enough, junior high, high school, adulthood, to choose for yourself, what kinds of activities or clubs or organizations or groups did you join? And now I want you to tell me if anything on your list, you don't have to share your list if you don't want to, but was there anything that surprised you? Was there anything that you had forgotten about that came up as you were looking back? And you'll have to unmute yourself if you do have something you want to share. Because that's where the secret lies, in becoming more creative. It lies in our childhood. We could see that from the studies, we could see that from the research. And so that's why I ask you to start looking back and taking time to see what it was that you were drawn to as a child, see what it was that somebody else saw in you, and eventually start incorporating those things into your adult life and taking the time to do that. Because that's when we're happiest, is when we're following our natural passions, when we're following whatever it is we were made to do, whatever it is we were designed to do, because we each, obviously from scientific research, we each were designed to create in some way.
I can share.
Yeah, would you, Kim?
So in grade school, I would write plays and then have my classmates act them out, or I'd make up stories and things like that. And when I was in college, one of my English classes, one of my teachers was so blown away by some of the things I wrote. She said, "I hope someday to read your written work."
Wow.
So now I do write, but it's more technical. So some of it does get published, or I happen to be on Facebook and thought there was an interesting blog to click on, and here it was one that I had written.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
For work. But I would like to do more creative writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of a lot of things in my head, but I never sit down to actually put it on paper and to allow myself to do that creative writing. So
and I hope you will. I hope you will, because I think you'll find that you're happier if you start doing that, if you start incorporating, even if you just start small and 15 minutes a day or something, or on the weekends or whatever.
Right. I tried journaling, but then I talk about the daily life, and I need to push that maybe a little bit more into more creative thinking. And
and journaling is one way to kind of grease the wheels, warm up. And some people say they do 3 pages a day, no matter if it made sense or not. That's just a way to get some writing done.
Yeah.
Did anybody else see something on their list that they'd kind of forgotten about, or that just resonated with them?
You know, I was chuckling because when you're talking about things as a kid, and I remember one of my favorite toys was my Easy Bake Oven. But I am not a baker, so we're not going to say that part of my childhood was not something that sparks creativity, because I cannot bake bread or anything like that. So, or maybe now as an adult, maybe I just need to use a light bulb instead of an oven.
Maybe that's it. Maybe I'm sure your husband would appreciate the mushy cakes. They're horrible. The food you would produce with those, unless they've gotten really fancy since then. Yeah. Oh. Anybody else? Also in your packets, you should have something called a permission slip. And we're going to take a little look at that tonight, because sometimes all we need is permission to be creative, permission to take the time for that. So I want you to look at that and kind of, you've got your permission slip now, so there's no excuse not to do some of these things. I want you to remind yourself what you loved doing as a child. I give you permission to think outside of the box, even if it sounds a little bit weird, but you want to try something different, that's okay. It's because that's where we get our most creative ideas, is when we're thinking outside of the box. And we will learn, if you come in 2 weeks, you will learn what I mean by that. I want you to schedule some time to create, even if it's just 15 minutes in the morning. I want you, as hard as it might be, to at least attempt to get some periods of solitude where you can just think, and maybe you want to journal during that time, whatever it is, just because that's where they actually say that daydreamers are more creative. So if your boss asks you why you're just staring out the window, just say you're coming up with some awesome ideas for work. But the science proves, and that's good news for those of us who had trouble paying attention in school, and maybe, and I was one of them. I bet there's some of you in this room. That's good news for us, that daydreaming. I don't mean you can spend your whole day daydreaming if you don't do anything about it, but that's where those ideas come from, is in daydreaming. You will try new things. I give you permission to try new things. And in that vein, I want you to allow yourself to fail at those new things and just consider it as fun. I want you to surround yourself with things that bring you joy, because when we have things around us, you can see in the background behind me, and this is my office, not my home, but my home looks very similar, that there are things here that bring me joy: the old typewriter, different pieces of art, the books on the shelves, my pencil. And I truly believe that having this pencil holder makes me more creative. So just surround yourself with things that give you joy. Be mindful of your moments, because some of us aren't very good at meditation or yoga or something, and we have a hard time with silence and quiet. But if we can I call it taking snapshots of the moments that are important, maybe the birth of a grandchild, or a child's wedding, or the first bud you see in spring. If you can mentally take a picture of that and just enjoy it and stop and literally smell the flowers, that helps you be more creative. Whatever works for you in doing that. Some people like to take pictures and then they captured that moment. Other people just like stop and pause and look at that beautiful thing in nature. Or I had to do that for one of my daughter's weddings. Somebody said, stop trying to do, just sit. It's all taken care of. Just sit and revel in that moment. And so by her telling me to do that, it helped me do that. And I'm so glad she did. And I wrote about those moments in my journal that night. Being kinder, you wouldn't think that had anything to do with creativity, but it does. Because again, science shows us that people who are more creative are more apt to start reaching out to people and helping others. And the same thing, it goes the other way. If you are more apt to be reaching out to others and being kind, it helps increase your creativity. So it's something you wouldn't think increases your creativity, but it does. And so does practicing gratitude. And you've probably heard of gratitude journals or gratitude jars. And it's a practice, people. I mean, if we start practicing gratitude and thinking of something that day to be thankful for, or something that evening to be thankful for, pretty soon it's easier to see that in our lives. It's easier to see things. And some days it's hard. Some days it might be, oh, yeah, somebody smiled at me in the grocery store. Okay, there's something I can be thankful for. I'm thankful I get out of bed every morning. I'm thankful when my feet hit the floor, but I had to get to the point where I had to practice. I had to practice that thankfulness and do it in a journal, just do it in your mind. But that also contributes to a more creative mind. Find a tribe, a group that feeds your soul. And we had one for a while at the Dyersville Library. But that tribe of like-minded people, what happens when and you may have that at work in brainstorming meetings, or if it's a good staff meeting, if there's some brainstorming going on, it's just like you all sound like you're so amazing because you're talking together and you're figuring that together. And if you get comfortable enough that you don't have to, you admit that, okay, this might sound crazy, but what have you thought about this? So finding a tribe, for me, it's a writers group. It's writers conferences I go to. For some people, it might be a Bible study because they want to feed their faith. For other people, it might be a gardening club. I don't even know if they do garden clubs anymore. If they don't, they should. They've got master gardeners, so that's something. I think they used to call it garden club for when I was a kid. And just if you can find a tribe of people, something really amazing happens in a room full of people interested about the same thing. There's just a lot of creativity that starts flowing. And there's people who have told me, well, I'm not creative. And when I listen to them or watch them at work, and I see something in them, I tell them, you know, I see this in you. Because sometimes all it takes is that one person telling them or seeing something in them to be encouraged, like, oh yeah, maybe there is something in me. Maybe I do have something, which I swear to you, you all have. And think about leaving a legacy of creativity. Let your family, your children, your neighbors, people around you see that you're bound and determined to follow and find those passions that you were born to do and follow them. And then you can be like my mother, who left a legacy of creativity. So does anybody have any questions about anything that I said tonight? I disappeared. I disappeared, and it wasn't a tornado. What we are going to do in 2 weeks, and I hope you will join me. I hope something tonight gets you thinking about what's in you. In 2 weeks, we are going to look at some active exercises that are guaranteed to jumpstart your creativity. I promise you, you will feel more creative by the end of the evening. And they're fun to do, and they don't take any talent. It's just something we're going to do for fun. And if you haven't picked up a packet, you will either need a packet, or I actually can send you via email some of the sheets if Shirley doesn't have enough of them. But the packet does have the handouts that we'll be using. You'll need a pencil and I think I even put blank pieces of paper in there. So it's, I hope you will join us. It's going to be a fun, creative evening.